Hello, this is Ina. It has been a long time since I created my last journal, and I'm so happy to be back. If you love French culture, fashion, history, today I have a real gem for your collection. My new journal is dedicated to the legendary French couple Aristide and Marguerite Boucicaut. They are famous for having created in the 19th century the first Parisian department store au bon marché with a completely innovative approach. Many concepts to which we are so well used now were introduced then for the first time. For example, fixed prices, sales, mail order, and home delivery, and so on. Boucicaut also took great care of their employees and were involved in various charity activities. Their personalities and their story touch me a lot, and this journal is a tribute I would like to pay to them. As you can see, it looks more like a treasure box, and it is true that I have put inside many rare, meaningful, and beautiful treasures. I have used for the cover of an antique booklet or diary offered to the Au Bon Marché clients. I hope the camera can capture the very subtle gold shading of the embossing. On the spine, you can see a beautiful 19th century fabric from the so-called Napoleon III period. For the closure, I used an antique silk stripe that I tore off a piece of fabric, and I have embellished it with a vintage French suspension in the form of a heart. So let's have a look inside. And before I forget, I would like to specify that the fabric on the spine was reinforced with some robust and yet flexible lining. So it's possible to open the journal flat at any place. For example, like this. If you have it on your lap, you can just open it like this. If you want to put it on your desk, it could be a good trick to put something behind. Like, for example, I am using this old thread spool. To the left, behind the cover, I have put a piece of a 19th century French wallpaper. And the hidden spine, to which I have sewn the signature, is made of an antique French kitchen towel or torchon. Before we continue any further, I would like to mention that the journal has 4 signatures or 4 chapters, and the first one is entitled Origins. The first page has a fragment of the most fine and exquisite embroidery. It's from the 19th century. It was previewed for a collar, but has not been finished. You can even see here a cutting line. Behind, there is some antique linen with an embroidered letter M for Marguerite. I have also added some ticking fabric here, an antique button, and some stitching. When creating this page, combining the very rough and simple linen behind with this breathtaking embroidery, I was thinking about Marguerite, who was born among the poorest and who died among the richest. Here I have made a tuck spot using antique crochet lace. And this tag here has been embellished with a 1920s French wine label from Burgundy, where Marguerite was born. This scrap also comes from an antique French wine book. There is an authentic 1940s millinery flower symbolizing Marguerite. At the back, there is a piece of a vintage wallpaper with these sweet images of a girl picking daisies. And inside the pocket, I have put a small leaflet. The cover is from modern gift wrapping paper, and inside there is a piece of a vintage ledger paper for journaling. To the right, there is an antique French postcard with lovely flowers, again implying reference to Marguerite. I have created this tuck spot, or I do not know how to call it, using details from an antique corset, some antique thread, and the page behind is from a 19th century French ledger with a vintage postmark collaging. Here I have added an extract from a French book depicting carefree childhood. You can open this page like this. And to the right here, I have included some fragments from an 1816 notary paper. That's the year of birth of Marguerite, with a fragment from an antique seamstress measurements ribbon, an antique thread card, some flowers. This page here comes from a diary of the shop Foyer du Petit Saint-Thomas, where Aristide worked when he arrived to Paris from Normandy. The page to the right is a fragment of a vintage French architect plan on which I echo-printed a grape leaf. This stripe here is antique fabric. Here you can see an image from a vintage book on French wine. I would like to draw your attention to these two scraps. This is silk from a 19th century corset, and this is a fragment from a 1920s wine bottle neck foil. You can flip it like this, and behind is a page from a vintage wine cellar book. It is still blank and offers space for journaling. Here you can see there are two textile pockets. The one to the left is antique, the one to the right is vintage from 1940s. The needlepoint embroidery doily and the small glass black button are antique. And here you can see an antique photo, which I have embellished with some fabric scrap, also antique. This photo makes me think of little Aristide Boucicaut, who since his childhood always accompanied his father, a milliner or head merchant, at work. He was usually seen wearing a cap like this. It was probably then when he discovered his love for textiles. There is also an antique postcard. It's blank behind, and there is a fragment from an antique notary document from 1810. That's the year of Aristide's birth. Here there are two pockets. made of antique fabric with handmade lace. The image at the back comes from a French book and is another tribute to Marguerite's childhood. To help her mother, she was keeping geese. This spread here contains a few tributes to Aristide Boucicaut's origins. You can see an image of a hat store. It is continued here on this tag. There is also a scrap from a hat. It is also antique. A page from the Au Bon Marché catalog. A page from an antique men's hat catalog with a silk stripe for decorating hats. And a very special document. It's a fragment from an antique French hat merchant ledger. And there are so many things happening on this spread. This page is from an antique thread catalog. I have put behind an antique postcard with the place in Belém where Aristide Boucicaut was born. Here we have an antique glassine envelope with some paper scraps and a small tag. The stripe here is of vintage textile. This tuck spot here is also covered with vintage fabric. There is an antique postcard and an antique paper scrap that I have eco-printed. At the back there is a blank ledger paper that I have stamped. And this spread is mostly textile. Here there is an antique sewing study with its original stitching and its red thread. There is something so touching about this unsure stitching, don't you find? There is an antique French laundry monogram, MG, for Marguerite Guérin. That's her initials before her marriage. We can lift the upper fabric, and behind there is an antique white embroidery with flowers. Behind I have put a cut out from an antique sewing magazine. To the right there is a pocket that I have made from antique lace, and I have added an antique photo of this girl that made me think of Marguerite. There is also an extract from a vintage notebook on sewing. The fabric behind is also antique. And this is the end of the first chapter, where we can see some antique linen with a fine muslin, some crochet lace, and the letter B for Boucicaut. I have called the next chapter Falling in Love. When creating it, I thought about Aristide and Marguerite falling in love with each other, with Paris. I thought about them discovering the passion for what they were doing. This page is an extract from a 1950s ledger. It's blank, as you can see from this side. There is a pocket that I made using some antique tulle, and there is a small tag that I made from a vintage botanical book. I glued some antique papers at the back. The pink thread is also antique, and the gem is modern. It's Bohemian glass. And I have also added a vintage Paris bank check. It's from 1930s. Here you can see the continuation of the 1850s ledger paper. I have made a small tuck spot using this modern embossed flower scrap. I have put inside a page from an antique poetry book containing a sonnet à Madame G, to Madame G, implying a reference to Marguerite Guérin. To the right, there is a page with a Paris view. It comes from one of the Paris photo books in my collection. There is an antique velvet ribbon, and I have added this sweet and elegant antique postcard saying "Pensez à moi," think about me. Here I have made a tuck spot with a beautiful angel image. There is an antique gold thread trim to the left. Behind I have put some antique scraps from a photo album and from a book. The paper at the background is modern scrapbooking paper. To the right, there is an extract from a vintage love letter, to which I have added a fussy cut of a rose image. Here you have an antique postcard. It's blank, with the famous Eiffel Tower image. And at the back, there is a fragment from an antique book. Here you can see its other side with an elegant image showing a fashionable at the time city outfit. To the right, there is a page from the diary of the Boucicaut store au Bon Marché with the dictionary of Paris streets, which I have embellished with a scrap from a stunningly rich and colorful silk ribbon. I have also included a page from an antique Paris directory. And the next spread is just full of tenderness. It has some collaging, for which I used the antique Paris map, a scrap from a modern gift wrapping paper, and here at the background there is a paper from the Au Bon Marché diary, to which I have clipped this beautiful angel image that I have glued on some antique paper with a golden trim. At the back there is a tuck spot that can be used for journaling, and I have put inside a scrap from an antique book. I have embellished this page with a fragment from an antique silk dress. I have sewn a small antique button to it, and this clip is also antique. I have embellished with a glass button and a piece of antique silk